And welcome back. You're watching Africa News Network, only on DSTV channel 405 with me, Cindy Mabi. The Minister of Public Enterprises, Lynn Brown, and the Eskom board today addressed members of Parliament's concerns over Brian Molefe's reinstatement as Eskom CEO. The Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises sought clarification on the status of Molefe's departure from the parastatal in November last year. But the tone and tenor of the MPs raising questions suggested a prejudice against Eskom. Let's first take a look at the vicious attacks hurled at the power utility.
They are increasingly aware that you are abusing state property and state resources in the name of yourselves, not in the name of the South African public.
Irrespective of what's going on in the court, the subjudice rules in the Midi television case is regarded as archaic and not applicable. You are accountable, sir, to us as members of Parliament, elected to hold you accountable and the Minister accountable. And I would submit, Madam Chairperson, that the subjudice rule does not apply and should not be used as an excuse to not give a full and proper account to this body and the people of South Africa for the shenanigans at Eskom.
We're dealing with a captured CEO of a state company called Brian Molefe, who works with the CEO called Mr. Singh. When they were in Transnet together, they channeled hundreds of millions of rands to trillion capital partners.
The state of capture report, as Honorable Shivambu mentioned, did indicate that there was prima facie evidence of wrongdoings between Oak Bay, Tegeta. And this also goes to the heart of people who are using SOEs as a cash cow and as their personal ATMs. They can just go and withdraw money from SOEs whenever they want to. This is what's happening in our country.
Minister Brown, we are being lied to. I think you have been lied to. It is very obvious. I am seeing what the country is seeing and I am cringing for you. Minister Brown, this board is an embarrassment and a disgrace to South Africa.
And facing a volley of accusations, Eskom held its ground. The board says they're open to an investigation. Eskom chairperson Dr. Ben Ngubane asserted that they fear nothing as there's nothing to hide.
The Minister stated that we came to her and we came a number of times, we presented the scenarios, and ultimately the scenario that we resorted to was, in terms of legal opinion we had. I hear phrases like, Eskom is a mess, Eskom is being torn apart, and yet our finances don't speak that language. The board has worked very hard. South Africa must at least acknowledge that. I don't know why it's so easy to rubbish everything. We sent boxes of information to the public protector. Bring in any auditor, any forensic investigator, let them look at the evidence. Forensic, any type of investigation into Eskom. We'll welcome it tomorrow. Not next year, tomorrow. Our legal person here, well, she works with legal, but she's also company secretary, has written to the public protector to give us information so we can start our own application in order to clear up the state of capture report.
Of course, you can join us on social media or give us a call 011-542-2186. Joining us in studios, Tsepo Khadima, a political analyst. Alex Mashilo is SACP national spokesperson. Gentlemen, good evening to you and thanks so much for joining us. We're not going to go into the merits or demerits of Brian's return necessarily. We'll touch on that based on a Labour perspective or point of view, whether there's illegality. I'm sure it's for the courts to prove. But just coming back to the abuse that we saw members of Parliament, the accusations, insinuations, largely based on the state of capture report, which hasn't been proven. What do you make of this onslaught on Eskom's board and executives?
Yeah, look, I mean, having followed the proceedings of the portfolio committee, and not just this portfolio committee, a number of other portfolio committees, and specifically with the one for Eskom today, it reminded me of what Voltaire once said. He said that judge a man or a woman, in our case, on the questions that they ask rather than on the answers that they give. And if I was to really carefully look at the questions that were being asked by the Member of Parliament, I was most certainly left with a very clear impression that perhaps maybe a majority of them, they're really out of their depth. They don't fully appreciate the relationship between management, the board of a company is a juristic person, the framework or the legal framework within which it functions and works. And in terms of the oversight, I mean, what we clearly had is a cry to co-manage state-owned enterprises, and more specifically this particular state-owned enterprises. And I didn't get an impression that, in fact, any of them would know the difference between a megawatt and a megawatt hour. And clearly that tells you that the questions that they would have been asking would not have been the right questions that can ensure that the lights keep on, and that we don't end up in a situation whereby there's disastrous consequences. Eskom is very important. I think it's over 180 billion rand a year in turnover. They've got a capital investment program of over 350 billion rand. We're talking about big numbers here, and the decisions that have to be made, really, they can't afford to have people co-managing. Those that can be supportive shouldn't be destructive. Oversight, of course, but clearly within any company, I've got to ask yourself a question. Any of the JSE 40 companies, if they had to operate within that environment which the members of parliament are seemingly demanding, how many of those businesses would be able to function, and how many of those CEOs would be able to stand? And also, is there any other utility anywhere in the world that is managed in the manner that they are? But lastly, Cindy, I want to say this. What worries me even more is this. Members of parliament have got a duty and not an option to promote constitutional rights. Now, when you hear members of parliament being the ones that are actually at the administering the violation of constitutional rights of citizens, that's got to worry you. That they, 2 years ago, we could talk all we want about Gupta this, Gupta that, Gupta that. Nobody has been able to go before any court of law or within any criminal justice system to prove any impropriety, and that clearly has lost currency. Now, to hear a member of parliament effectively, tacitly, how can I say, tacitly really calling for unconstitutional things to be done on another member of the public, that should worry you more, because a member of parliament should know better. And these members of parliament today, I think what they did clearly shows that they have little regard for that constitution.
Yeah, Alex, just your view, and I mean, I concur with you, Tsepo, that the whole narrative around state capture being done by the Gupta family, and by the way, these are my own words in my own handwriting, it doesn't have the necessary backing. You could say there's prima facie evidence, which generally means that it is perceived to be correct unless proven otherwise. These are state-owned entities. There's a money trail that you can follow, and everything has been responded to accordingly. Eskom themselves trying to explain the Tegeta deal until they blew in the face, but there is generally no appetite to listen to the rationale that they applied in dealing, with Tegeta. How long can we perpetuate this, regurgitate the same narrative without substantial evidence?
I will be careful of closing investigations before they are open. You will recall that the state of capture report by the public protector recommended a remedial action that the president must establish a judicial commission of inquiry. That commission has not been established. I think we will be very wrong to pass judgment on other people before the mechanisms that have been recommended to be put in place are put in place and people go there to submit evidence. Secondly, I will also be very careful, because you see, I've been watching the review of what happened in Parliament from your presentations, You characterized it as an attack on Eskom. I will be worried where MPs characterize what we say from this studio as a counter-attack at them. If there are attacks, and we do say these are attacks, we must be very careful of organizing counter-attacks. We must promote a situation whereby people work together. The fact of the matter is that there are problems. The manner in which Brian was reappointed, by the way, you said reinstated. In terms of the labor law, things don't work that way. There is the Labor Relations Act. It governs the principles for reinstatement, and none of those principles applied in terms of Brian. Reinstatement is a labor law word. Brian was reappointed in a position he had left, and after he left that position, he went to Parliament to be sworn in as an MP. There is a code governing MPs and their employment elsewhere. He received remuneration during a period when he was an MP. In fact, Eskom advertised the position with a closing date, and Brian was appointed. I mean, if you are not concerned about that, it will be highly problematic.
No, obviously processes need to be followed, and there needs to be accountability, whether the board needs to take responsibility, and whatever decision minister makes in this, you call it reappointment of Brian Molefe. I just want to get a labor consultant.
In fact, it was both reappointment and re-employment.
Yes, correct. I'll ask a labor consultant here, with due respect. Tony Healy, good evening to you. And just with the whole Brian Molefe situation being back at Eskom, legally speaking, I mean, the board has now taken responsibility, saying that it was a blunder. They miscalculated his pension payout. How best could this have been handled if they really needed a caliber or leader of his caliber back at Eskom?
Good evening. Look, there's absolutely no doubt that this whole episode has become farcical, with not even the minister knowing whether Mr. Molefe had resigned or not. The fact of the matter is that he did, and I've seen his employment contract and all the relevant correspondence and the affidavits. At first he has resigned, he's then retrenched, he's then retired, and now he's on unpaid leave. The fact of the matter is that regardless of all of that, there can be no doubt that on the facts that his services terminated at Eskom at the end of December. Now, if the board and the minister had a concern around the pension payout issue, then their solution ought to have been to litigate on that particular issue and not reinstate Mr. Molefe as an employee. And that's that is what they've done, and that's what's caused this hullabaloo. And at the end of the day, I think also the board needs to look at itself, and the minister herself, and ask themselves, how could they possibly have acted in such a way that has brought about this degree of ambiguity regarding such a critical issue?
Yeah, Tony, just stay on the line. Just your response, especially, just very in layman's terms, whether the board has got the prerogative and the power and jurisdiction to recall or reappoint any other employee.
Look, I mean, the memorandum of incorporation of Eskom, prior to it being amended and updated, clearly stipulated certain things, and Minister Brown has really articulated that. I think I just want to touch on the issue that, should the board have chosen to litigate, it would not have been in the interest of the company. Nobody would. We must bear in mind that his departure from Eskom, one of the conditions precedent was that there was an agreement that a certain amount of money would be due to him. Whether that money was a miscalculation or any other way, but that is a fact. That is the agreement that had been reached. Now, if that agreement was to be abandoned, it can't just be abandoned willy-nilly. And the last thing that you want is to have Eskom for a long time, because our courts, in any case, are backlogged, for them not to be able to appoint a CEO because of this litigation. It would not be responsible. In fact, you can't just litigate for the case, for the just that because you need to litigate. The board has got a fiduciary duty to ensure that it acts in the best interest of the company. Now, when you got to look at it, you say, well, on the balance, this person that we have here, in terms of his ability to execute his duties and functions, consummate to the position at hand, how is he? And clearly, history is on his side. We have a enterprise now that is cash positive. When he took over, there were no more than 3 months of cash flows left within Eskom. In fact, there were other quarters that were pushing for the privatization. Now, litigation is not the issue, but also the other thing that worries me is that if the members of parliament really clearly were au fait and were seized with the real issues at hand, other things they should have inquired into that. There are a number of times where we saw, at one time, I mean, the issue I've publicly spoken about it, the war room, it was an extra body that was operating and yet making fundamental decisions on the running of Eskom. It was unlawful in terms of its constitution, and yet it was making decisions. They never inquired in that. The war room even made procurement decisions, particularly in terms of the independent power producers who signed short-term power purchase agreements of 3 years. They never inquired in that. Those are the things that created financial hardship. Now, when you have a board that is really making these decisions that now have left us with a utility that is stable, that is cash positive, that can be able to continue with this investment program, that is to be applauded. The issue of the rating agencies is a non-starter because that we can talk about. There is no reason howsoever for South Africa to continue borrowing money. And Donald Trump has just shown us that, by the way. He's advocating for budget cuts. He's going to be delivering a budget where he's going to cut spending to the bone. That's what South Africa needs to do. I can't see how people can bring in the rating agencies having downgraded us, because in any case, they are going to downgrade our rand-denominated debt. So the parliamentarians have been misdirecting themselves. I'm saying that they had to look at the real issues that are affecting Eskom. Can Eskom keep the lights on tomorrow and 10 years from now?
All right, let's get the South African National Civic Organization. Jabu Mahlangu is the national spokesperson. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Now, with the board having essentially owning up to the being misguided or whatever it is regarding Brian Molefe's redeployment or re-employment or reinstatement, or I'm even equally as confused. Do you feel that the Eskom was given adequate opportunity though to submit their responses and rationale?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. As Sanko, we had. When Brian Molefe left the SABC, we did express our disappointment because we had acknowledged the kind of work that he had done there. When he went to Parliament, we were not impressed. Remember, because we were saying he left because he felt he's taking a particular responsibility for the cloud that is hanging over his head, emanating from the public protector's board. So we were saying, wow, here's a man who knows what he has done, and he's stepping off to allow that process to unfold. So when he got appointed as a member of parliament, we raised our concern as to what is it that is actually happening. And when he left parliament, we were actually saying, no. Nobody should make parliament a playground for people who just come there, and it's just unprecedented. It's never happened before. And his appointment, whichever way and word we use back to Eskom, our view was that procedures have been flouted. You see, we as Sanko, we are worried when people run institutions as if they are running tuck shops. That is a public entity, it's a public institution. There are rules and regulations that need to be adhered to. If we start to interfere with the rule of law, we run the risk of messing up organizations. Whether the organization is performing well or not, it's not a here nor there. It's a question that, yes, if you're doing well, stick to the rules and procedures that are applicable. Don't flout them because you carry a particular capital. So we are worried that Eskom is becoming reckless, but we also were not happy with the stance of the minister. Because we, as we stand now, we don't know what the stance of the minister was, because at one stage the minister said, okay, that's good, I support, let it go. The next thing the minister has changed now was, I didn't apply my mind properly, I didn't hear it. That thing is very reckless, extremely reckless for an entity of Eskom's magnitude. it is very reckless and it can become a serious danger. And our view
but Mr.
Well,
Mahlangu, can I just, maybe let's just explore the other narrative, the fact that there is a deliberate attempt to again privatize or shed state assets by independent, be they power producers or coal suppliers, to enjoy the lucrative tenders, if you will, in those departments, and therefore Eskom is under attack to benefit those that had always been on the gravy train, so to speak.
Well, I wouldn't speak with authority on that matter. Really, we wouldn't speak on authority on that matter. We don't have the necessary facts. We're just looking at the issues of governance, non-adherence to governance issues, and that's why, as in the last NEC of Sanko, I think happened 2 weeks ago, Sanko's view was that that board should be dissolved. I think they're just too reckless.
All right, Mr. Mahlangu, much appreciated. Just last comment, Mr. Tony Healy, Labour consultant, in the interdict from the DA opposing Brian Molefe's appointment. What strength, especially from a labour law position, does Eskom have, or is their case essentially a failure even without submission?
Yes, I think one... Cindy, sorry, you're speaking to me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Look, I think as a matter of fact, from a labour law perspective, regardless of whether one is pro or anti Mr. Molefe, the employment contract terminated at the end of December. Now, you can't make this up as you go along, which is what the board seems to be doing, and simply motivating all their decisions based on the fact that they believe Mr. Molefe is competent. Regardless of Mr. Molefe's competence, his employment contract came to an end at the end of December. That's what he says in his letter to the board in November. That's what the board confirms themselves in November. That's certainly what the minister understood the case to be, and hence Mr. Molefe moves on to become a member of parliament, which was fine in the circumstances in terms of the prevailing rules. But what you can't do is simply reappoint him, reinstate him in circumstances where his employment in law had clearly terminated already at the end of December. If the board had felt that Mr. Molefe warranted being appointed, then there would have been nothing necessarily preventing them from having done so following a normal recruitment procedure, because we must remember that they'd advertised the CEO position and had already begun interviewing candidates. Now, they could have quite easily have added Mr. Molefe to that list.
Yeah. All right, Tony Healy, thanks. Sorry, we just have to take closing comments in studio. Mr. Mashilo, just in terms of how the engagements went in Parliament, it's an indication that clearly there is discontent with the Molefe situation, but I'm not even sure how it's going to play out. What does it mean, though, for the state-owned entities if we're going to say they're deliberately being run or being perceived to be inefficient so that they can be sold off?
That it's a problem, but we must not unfairly treat members of parliament. There is a context here. I have studied labor law. I could tell you that if I applied for that position of Eskom CEO and Brian was re-employed and reappointed to that position the manner it happened, I could go to the labor court to challenge that for having been unfairly discriminated. You see, so you must look at what happened as Eskom from a point of view of labor law. And I'm speaking representing workers here. There is a worker who applied and was interviewed, and Brian Molefe was appointed irregularly, the manner in which he was reappointed. That is unfair. And this is the outrage that was expressed by members of parliament. I want us to focus on fact. His employment at Eskom was terminated. his recruitment must follow due process. Due process was not followed. And you see, this is what brought down the SABC, which today is looking for a bailout. Exactly, governance decay, governance breakdown. And
I just want to give Tsepo an opportunity as well.
No, he had two opportunities. This is just my second opportunity.
No,
May
but
I
Alex,
just
we
conclude?
always have this. You and I always get stuck on this.
The board must be dissolved for advancing governance decay at Eskom. Brian Molefe's reappointment must be reversed, and the two must happen with immediate effect.
Look, I mean, Parliament, it is not their privilege to really decide on how Eskom is run. It's for a board that is there. That is company law. Mr. Molefe can either be paid 30 million rand or he can go back to work. That is a still. If people are so aggrieved that he's gone back to work, you know, pay the man what is due to him, because if you do not do so, he will go to court, and then that is not in the interest of anybody, but also this is just one example that it is a splendid misery to be appointed to any of the state-owned enterprises, and woe unto future CEOs and chairpersons of these boards, because what we have seen, the vilification and the attacks that they are suffering, woe unto us.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks indeed to our guests and on the phone line as well. We'll take a quick ad break. See you shortly.